So, hello everyone, welcome to session 4, Bring It to the Business. This is our 4th session in our 5-part series, all about user-friendly records management. For those folk who have been with us since session 1, great to have you again. Really good to see so many folk who are coming through our journey with us. For the few new folks who have joined us, welcome. Welcome to our webinar series. If you want to get caught up in sessions 1, 2, or 3, you can find those sessions all recorded on our Habanero Consulting YouTube channel. My name is Rick Martin. I'm the practice lead for enterprise content management here at Habanero. I also have my colleague, Natalie Veldhoen. She's a senior consultant in our enterprise content management practice joining us. She is actually in a different location to me today, so we have slightly different acoustic setups. So you may notice a little bit of difference there, but hopefully not too bad. So, just by way of introduction, talk a little bit about Habanero and a little bit about our partner Collabware, who have helped us produce this webinar series, and then we'll jump into the content. So Habanero is passionate about helping people and organizations thrive. We deliver this by creating great workplace experiences for our clients and our clients' employees. These workplace experiences are often delivered through solutions. Could be maybe an employee portal, maybe a records management solution, or even a customer portal that delight the users, as well as delivering that, obviously delivering that critical value back into the business. In our experience, records management solutions have not always adequately enough addressed the experience of the end users, and we believe this is to the detriment of that solution and also to the detriment of the end user and their overall experience and satisfaction at work. We think that our approach in this regard is very unique. Collabware. Collabware is a software firm based here in Vancouver in Canada. They develop intelligent enterprise information management software, and they are, as we are, focused on making sure that that software is simple, seamless, and transparent. And that really shines through as you get into the software itself. It's really sort of phenomenal experience when you start to use it once you've got it all set up. So this is our agenda for the day. I will talk briefly about user-friendly records management. This is a bit of a recap from our previous webinars. I will keep it very brief for everyone who's been on the line for each of our webinars. You know almost exactly what I'm going to say. I'll cover a little bit about our webinar series, and then we're going to jump into focusing on the end users' jobs. That's going to be Natalie covering off that section. I will then talk about our tiered approach to content. The basic premise is that not all content is treated equally, and we think there's a different approach for different value and for different quality content. And then finally, Natalie will talk about migration tools and techniques to wrap things up, and we will have questions. So if you have any questions, please do submit them through the webinar software. Spencer will be harvesting those questions, and will feed them to us at the end for a Q&A period. If we don't get to your questions at the end, if we have too many, then we will respond to you directly after the webinar. So I hope that's okay. But please do submit these questions. I would really value your perspectives and any areas that you would like us to cover, maybe in our 5th webinar series, or even in subsequent future webinars that we do from time to time. So please don't be shy. So user-friendly records management, why do we need to care? There are 3 reasons why we think you need to care. Firstly, if you're building records management solutions that are inherently friendly and inherently accessible to the end user, you're going to get better adoption, and you're also going to get better usage. We distinguish the two. Adoption is about getting people into the system, whereas that usage is really about having people use the system correctly. In a records management context, that might be correctly classifying documents or correctly storing documents in the right location in the environment, for example. So the other reason this is really critical is that you're competing in the global digital workplace. I talked previously about the CIO at General Electric, and he presents a very compelling picture that you're competing in a global digital workplace, and you have to create solutions and provide solutions to users that they will use in a sea of really high quality digital workplace solutions if you want that solution to be used within your enterprise. And then thirdly, people's jobs aren't what they used to be. People's jobs are creative and collaborative. And if you're trying to impose some routine or challenging workloads on them, if you're trying to get them to declare records or trying to get them to add a bunch of metadata into the documents as they save, or providing a complex user interface for them to be saving their documents to, then you're going to really struggle to do that. So these are the three reasons. This is why user-friendly records management is really important. These are the three big obstacles that you face. So what is user-friendly records management? So firstly, and we're going to jump into this today, we think about not just focusing on the end user, but focus on the end user's jobs. We also look to isolate users from records keeping activities. Thirdly, we want to reduce barriers to access. This isn't necessarily about the solution, but this is everything wrapped around the solution. And then finally, and this is the really, really important piece, is always evolve. You always want to keep on building the solution and developing and evolving, because absolutely, for sure, your end user requirements will be evolving and your business needs are evolving continuously also. Okay, so this is our webinar series. First of all, way back in February, we covered off a vision and roadmap. We then talked about planning and implementation strategies. 2 weeks ago, we talked about developing the foundation. We have what we call the ECM portal, which is really the foundational element of successful enterprise content management or records management solutions. Today, we will be talking about bringing it to the business, which is organizational rollout. And then in 2 weeks' time, 2 weeks from today, March 31st, we'll be talking about post-go-live support and evolution. So I'm going to hand it over to Natalie to talk us through the next agenda item here. Just to add a little bit of context as we jump into this. So we advocate developing, as I've just said, we advocate developing a core ECM foundation. And we really focus on that in webinar number 3. We also advocate progressing iteratively through the organization. We don't believe that these ECM projects are successful if you attempt to sort of boil the ocean. So progress iteratively through the organization. You can ultimately do 2 or 3 streams in parallel, if that makes sense. But the overall sense of this is that you're iterative. You learn the lessons, you adapt your approach, you engage your users and your stakeholders as you go. And so now I'm going to hand over to Natalie, who's really going to focus and spend some time talking about engaging the users and engaging the stakeholders. Over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Rick, for getting us started. We are now going to look more closely at getting business buy-in. The success of any new system hinges on whether or not it is adopted. You can build and put significant effort into designing and building an elegant solution, but if it doesn't get used, there really is little point. You need people on the team to feel that the system helps them to do their work more effectively. Whether or not this effectiveness is realized, any change will create a disruption in work, which can be met with resistance. You need to plan and ensure that your implementation strategy is solid. Your focus might be records management, document control, or ECM, but that is not the focus of the team that you're going to be working with. In order to help them, you need to know what drives them as a team and what they're accountable for. And you need to help them meet their goals. If you can help them with their jobs rather than add to their work, you are much more likely to get buy-in and adoption for your ECM solution. When working with clients on adoption assessments, we are often asked to help flesh out the priorities of teams that we are working with. This process requires that you be a good listener and a bit of a detective. Essentially, as Habanero's VP Ben Skelton mentioned in the last webinar, you need to learn about your audience. Find out who they are, what they do, what does a typical day look like for them. Some techniques to consider are listening labs, one-on-one interviews, or facilitated workshops. But you can do some initial fact-finding from just looking at artifacts in your business. So, what do you need to look to? Well, first look to corporate priorities. All businesses and organizations have short and long-term plans. Make sure you know what's in the works for where you are. Are there new projects or projects moving into new phases? Whatever is a priority for the organization will be a priority for leaders on the team. On a recent project that we were on, a company we were working with had experienced an awful year with health and safety related incidents on a construction site. It happens. Corporate priority for the year was to dramatically decrease the TRIF, the total recordable injury frequency, for the organization. So, ensuring people in the field had access to the most current and reliable sources of health and safety information became a way to engage all the teams, as they knew how important that was to the business as a whole. It made the work that we were doing much easier to get buy-in on. So integrating corporate priorities into your project is like giving it a hand up. It increases visibility and gives you a much greater chance of accessing the resources that you need to be successful. So next, you want to know what the team's core accountabilities are. This is different from the work they do day to day, which can be much broader in nature. Core accountabilities are sort of the key activities or tasks that are fundamental to the business. These are the types of tasks that, if not completed in a timely manner, put the business at risk, either from an operational standpoint, compliance standpoint, or reputational perspective. So just as an example, a regulatory team for an upstream oil and gas company needs a way to organize content related to permit applications. They're consistently filing for new permits and upgrading permits, and they need to be able to track them against submission deadlines. Basically, a late or missed submission could mean fines or the shutdown of the operations of a plant, which can affect the entire company's bottom line. So the ECM solution must support the team in effectively completing these submissions in whatever way possible, whether it's just collating the content or being able to also integrate in those deadlines and alerts and messaging and things like that around reporting. Some way you need to support that part of your business. Coming up in the webinar, Rick is actually going to speak to the idea of tiering content, so prioritizing business critical documentation ahead of others, which is often directly related to these core accountabilities. So next, do a little bit more digging and get to know how a team's success is measured within an organization. You may need to look at departmental goals, look around people's desk spaces for hints and clues, and of course have conversations with members of the team, particularly those that are responsible for managing the content of their team. So when you're designing your system, if you can help prioritize content and design metadata to assist with reporting based on these measures, you will have already made progress in getting the team on board. So an HR team has a corporate goal of 45 days from posting to hire. This is pretty common in many organizations to have this type of goal. And it's the job of most HR teams to do that actual recruiting process. But what we can actually do is we can use that information to determine what metadata and reporting might be important to this team and their content associated with recruitment. So if you can help build the measures into the system and get that measure as close to the business outcome, which is basically getting the right new staff member hired and onboarded as quickly as possible, you will be helping the business while they're using the ECM solution to manage sensitive people files, a win-win situation for both the HR department and you. Finally, know what external drivers affect the work of a team. These can be much more erratic and a lot more difficult to predict. Some teams are more sensitive to factors and conditions outside the walls of the business. Changes in legislation, reporting requirements, or stakeholder groups may dramatically affect the priorities of these teams. Understand cycles in their work. Consider monthly, quarterly, or yearly activities. These are often the way that external agencies work with some of our business teams. We recently built a solution for a team in charge of tax auditing, which recognized the repeatable nature of the auditing process, but allowed for flexibility in content and context. It provided the structure required to support work, but was not too rigid so that it could not support different auditing questions and evidence formats. So in addition to knowing about the team, we also know from many previous engagements that getting buy-in from a team requires empowering their leadership. Everyone is busy. Leadership needs the ability to prioritize the work the team has ahead of them. Create a realistic schedule and work with the team to ensure that everyone has the time to devote to the work ahead. The end user needs to have an active role in any ECM implementation in order to ensure that the system works for them. If the work you need the team to do is not messaged as being important from their leadership, you will never get the traction you need to keep the project moving. Communicate the process of the project, link it back to business value, which can then help the leaders support the team in knowing the value of the work that they are taking on. Don't assume that leadership knows the key messages for the project. Many leaders have multiple projects on the go, and being able to confidently speak to all of them can be difficult. Provide them with an elevator pitch, a summary of the project timeline and roles that are required. Even an FAQ list or postcards can be useful in helping leaders to build momentum in their team. We've all seen the little giveaways, the stickers, those types of things. They're all useful in building awareness about the project and maintaining sort of visibility about the importance of a project. An informed and well-prepared leader can much more confidently support your project. Building project engagement is a key to success when working with teams on their ECM solution. Try and give them something early. If you can build out and give users a small, well-developed part of the solution early in the process, it gives them a realistic view of what to expect. Go back and revisit with the teams often, whether it's to get feedback, provide training, or help with migration. Change requires constant support. You need to be back with those teams on an ongoing basis to ensure that they are re-engaging in the process of the project. Training needs to be targeted, meaningful, and at the right time. We've all seen incredible projects that have not been successful because of a poor training strategy. Finally, we need to build self-sufficiency within the team. So we have to build out some sort of support network, identify prospects for super user community, foster that community, provide help environments for people, give them some self-sufficiency to be able to make the solution do what they need it to do. Building effective training is difficult. If you have training resources within your organization, it is essential that you work with them on developing the training that you need for your ECM initiative. Keep the following in mind as you do so. Number one, training should be relevant to the team that you are working with. Although basic training may be more general to an entire organization, if you can target examples and case studies to specific teams and audiences, you'll find it much easier to keep the audience involved and interested. Personalize the training. Give people options and times, locations, online, face-to-face, graduated levels. One of the things that we find very useful is to use video training, especially for little short clips of how-tos and things like that. An Office 365 solution has a video portal built in, easy to use, or use YouTube, or even your LMS system. Make sure that you deliver training in a timely manner. And if you're going to do that, you therefore need a sustainable model, something that can last over time. So on a recent project that I was involved with, there was an implementation of a integrated transactional system that was happening alongside the ECM one. It happens quite commonly. The team doing the implementation had developed a highly detailed curriculum and many training sessions that were very well done, but they were basically to be rolled out with the project. But there was nothing in place to support people new to the organization or who changed their roles after the implementation. So essentially, implementation happened one day, and if somebody was hired the next day, there was no plans for how we were supposed to train that individual because all of the face-to-face classroom training sessions were over. It was a significant risk to the business going forward, and there was significant cost incurred for this one-time training rollout, and then more costs incurred to develop sustainment training on top of that. So whenever you have a new system going in, make sure that you monitor the training development and ensure that it is sustainable so it can be integrated into your onboarding or your professional development resources. All new systems and processes require a mix of support options for end users. We often hear of organizations trying to implement support communities and finding it a struggle. I like to say, so how are you going to make your super users, well, super? Finding and targeting people with an aptitude or interest for ECM in the business is key, but you also need to provide them with learning opportunities, time to be the mentor, and recognition. This needs to be a partnership with business leadership and probably HR to ensure that your community thrives and grows. Build your community slowly over time and ensure you account for turnover in staff due to people leaving or priorities changing. Providing a place for all users to access content to help themselves and learn more is always a great idea. But you need to ensure that the site is kept current and easy for staff to use. One of our clients supports their super user community and end users with the site above. They offer training, documentation, FAQs, a discussion forum, and calendar which shows a number of in-class and online learning options. This is a great way to build community for your ECM solution. I'm now going to hand it over to Rick. He's going to look more closely at ways to approach your content.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Natalie. So now we're going to talk about what we consider a tiered approach to content. The basic premise here is that not all content is created equal, and so not all content should be treated in an equal way. As you think about your functional rollouts within your enterprise, we believe that you should scale them based on the content that you're dealing with, or based on any number of things, but the business process that you're dealing with, and so on and so forth. Some key facets around why you're scaling these functional rollouts could be around the content risk. For example, there will be, within your records management realm, there will be risky content and there will be less risky content, or content with greater risk of non-compliance, or if you're non-compliant. And there will be areas, technically they should be captured as records, they will be lower organizational risk. There's another facet around business value. As you look through your organization, we've talked a lot about being able to drive business value as you deploy your records management solution, and so business value will be another lens through which you want to look. Related to that is, of course, strategy. So if you have areas of your business that are super strategic, or where you have strategic imperatives, that might be a rationale for focusing a little bit more effort as you approach that area of your business within your enterprise content management or within your records management program. And then either within your vision for either the organization or your vision for your enterprise content management program. Back in the first webinar series, or the first session of our webinar series, we talked about developing a vision and roadmap. So you might want to go back and revisit that webinar series if you find it might be useful. Ideally for us, that roadmap prescribes features and functions of your solution. Might be site directory or search or what have you, but it also should describe content areas within your enterprise. This might be departmental, might be functional, it might even be business process oriented. You can't, however you decide to approach records management within your enterprise, you just can't do it all at once. So you need some level of process or ordering as you go through your enterprise to do it. We have discussed this process at length, so I'm not going to jump into this. What this section is really all about is scaling the effort. And we have a model that we've developed that we apply to our enterprise content management projects so that we can understand how much time and effort and attention we should put into each of our components within our project. So this is a very simple model. We have 3 different tiers here. And the 3 different tiers go from bottom to the top. And as you go from the bottom to the top, you have an increasing level of effort to deliver each tier, but you also have an increasing level of value being delivered back into the enterprise. So the first, actually I'm going to read it from the top down here. So the highest tier is what we call the business solution tier. This is for content or business process that is quite high risk and also really ultimately really high value to the organization. The middle tier here is what we call custom team sites. So this is really taking SharePoint, we've talked a lot about SharePoint, taking SharePoint and customizing the team sites as you roll them out into the organization. And then the lowest tier is really intended to be sort of a bit more cookie cutter. We call this templated team sites. So this is where you've got relatively low risk and relatively low value by however you wish to define low value content within the organization. One thing just before we jump off this slide, one of the real benefits that we found in articulating this, this is really a spectrum, as you can imagine. You have areas where you really don't want to put too much effort in, right the way through to the business solution where it really makes sense to put a lot of time and attention and effort into developing and crafting these business solutions. One value of articulating it in this way is simply in developing a common vocabulary. In our case, a common vocabulary between us and our client, and also a common vocabulary between or within our team. It sort of goes along the lines of, okay, well, we want to do this particular business process, and we think that this is a level 2 tier, or we think that this business process is really high value, and we want this to be a business solution tier. And that really communicates to everybody the time and attention that, in a relatively simple way, the time and attention that they need to be placing as they progress into this particular area within our enterprise content management. One thing to note here, and this is not the world's most complex slide by any stretch, is that, of course, you think about the value on one axis and the effort and ultimately time on the other axis. The thing to note here is that the axes are probably not linear. Our experience has been that as you go through the different tiers, you're probably not necessarily talking multiples of value, and you're probably not talking multiples of effort. It could even be as an order of magnitude higher. And maybe that order of magnitude is between sort of custom sites and that business solution, but this isn't 1x, 2x, and 3x. And it's really important to understand that if you think about the value that you can deliver within your organization, you'll find very quickly that the value isn't 1x, 2x, and 3x. And so you really need to think about that as you're starting to get your head wrapped around how much effort and how much time and attention you put towards your functional rollout here. And I've got some interesting examples, hopefully, to really bring this to light. So just to focus for a moment, when we're talking about the areas of content here, the solution domains, it might be a multitude of ways of slicing content within your enterprise. So it could be a departmental focus. You do one department and then the next department and then the next department, sales and then marketing or operations and so on. If you think about this tiered approach to content, it's a little bit harder to pull off in this context because inherently you're talking about a fairly consistent level of value within one domain, and you'll find as you look into departments, all the content within one department won't be really high value or really low value. So the departmental metaphor is a little bit harder to pull off in this context. The next domain or the next way of slicing up your content might be, and this would be a favorite for us, might be by business process. So it might be an onboarding business process or a procurement business process, or maybe a business process around regulatory and legislative compliance, perhaps. You could also slice and dice it by function, which is really a slightly different way than departments, but typically if you have a multi-divisional organization, you might have multiple human resources departments across your entire enterprise. And then the final domain, the final way you could slice this is sort of more of a case management approach. So you might have a domain of content around or relating to a person or relating to a truck or relating to an application like a development variance permit in a municipal space, for example. And that's I always find a very, very interesting way of slicing and dicing content as you look to put it into your records management solution. Okay, so we're going to just jump into describing these three tiers in a little bit more detail. So first of all, business solutions. We believe that these business solutions should be considered a distinct initiative. The notion of considering it a distinct initiative allows you to get really clear about the outcomes for this particular business solution. If you put it slightly at arm's length, you can separate yourself from the outcomes of your overall enterprise content management or records management initiative, and you can think about the outcomes pertinent to this particular business solution itself. In this, we think that there's a lot of sense in thinking about it as an overall project process. So planning, design, build, deployment, including, of course, migration strategy where it makes sense, and then finally support what you are going to be managing after the initial go live. It is worth saying that this should still be integrated into that greater enterprise content management experience. This isn't an application that sits completely on its own. Think about this as an application that sits on your phone, and it's just part of a broader content management scenario, really, rather than something that sits in a totally isolated environment. From a records management perspective, what we found is that as you deliver that business solution, you can really focus on the needs of the end user and the needs of that business stakeholder. And then if you do that, you get the opportunity to deliver records management in the background. And really you can deliver that records management in a way that's really seamless to the end user. This is an example of a business solution that we've built. This is actually for a utility firm out here in British Columbia. This is a repository for call center operations. The business value that they were seeking as they approached us to build this solution was, firstly, they were insourcing their call center operations. So they had to train and onboard something like 300 call center staff almost overnight. And so the critical piece was that the content that they were creating in here was very, very easy to access without a need for a ton of training for each of the call center staff. Of course, call centers, generally speaking, have a fairly high turnover. So by making this really intuitive, they were reducing the amount of ongoing effort that they had to commit to training new staff. And the critical business outcome for them was compliance. The content in this solution still forms a record, and they need to be able to prove that their processes were documented and correct at any point going forward. So the records and the procedures and policies that we're capturing in the system are also still a business record as well. And then finally, it being a call center application, it's very important that it's really quick to access content. You can see that procedure quick search link on the screen right here. So there's multiple ways of accessing the content here. The solution to deliver this was SharePoint. This is the SharePoint solution we're looking at right now. It doesn't really look much like most people's experience of SharePoint, but this is a custom designed SharePoint application. Within this environment, you have a collection of subsites and team sites where all of that content, the policies and the procedures for the call center, how to add a new customer, how to address a customer complaint or a customer query, and so on and so forth. All of the content sits behind that navigation at the top here. It's interesting to think about how this solution could have been presented. So in the case of this particular client, the business value, as we've said, is all about high-speed access to content, supporting a really rapid onboarding process, and of course, driving compliance. To paint a fairly stark picture here, the solution could have been as simple as a document library, and this is what we're looking at right here, with all of those records, procedure 1.1, procedure 1.2, and so on and so forth. The point here is that whilst technically this would have fulfilled the requirements, we want to be able to navigate, we want to be able to access the procedures, it really wouldn't have delivered the value that we sought: compliance, easy and fast access, and support for onboarding. It would be very, very hard to argue that with a solution as simple as the one that we're looking at here, we'd have been able to deliver these outcomes, to the extent that it just wouldn't have worked in the broader business value context. We might have been technically compliant from a records management perspective, and sure, technically everybody can see procedure 1.8, but really wouldn't have delivered the business value that we're looking to do. So that the point of the business solution is that we're able to deliver a really high quality business outcome, as well as delivering the compliance and any other business outcomes that we seek. Okay, so the next tier here is the tier that we call custom team sites. So really this is a SharePoint team site. Generally speaking, that is somewhat customized. So it might be a custom information architecture, might be custom workflow to accommodate a particular business process, or it might be a little bit of custom integration back with another product, maybe an Intex or maybe some other tool. As we look and think about the SharePoint team sites, typically speaking, we have some level of collaboration and records management coming together. And again, we think that with a bit of structure and a bit of focus and attention within the team site, you can focus on the collaboration that the end user is looking to achieve, and you can deliver records management fairly invisibly or seamlessly in the background. This would be a really great example of a custom team site. Here we have a fictitious, I'm not exposing anyone submitting resumes into Habanero, but this is a fictitious team site within Habanero. And the theme of this team site is recruitment. So this would be what I would consider to be a custom team site. We have a customized information architecture, so you can see we have 4 different document libraries: incoming resumes, interview notes, reference checks, and offer letters and acceptances. And there might be some level of workflow behind, as for example, Arthur Banks, his resume comes in, and there might be some workflow that's kicked off in the background to progress him through the system. The final tier here is what we call templated team sites. These are much, much simpler team sites again. So this would be deployment, or the delivery strategy for these team sites would really be just part of the overall ECM or records management project. What we strive for here is minimum variation between the templates. These are designed for really quick hit deployments. You have a stakeholder or an end user who needs to be able to store typically low value content, and you can provision these team sites in a very fast, cost effective manner, deliver it to the user. They can populate it with content, or you have some sort of a migration process, and then you and they are good to go onto the next content area. Again, just like with the custom team sites, this is still really good for collaboration. You can still focus on collaboration and deliver that sort of records management component fairly invisibly, or our experience has been using Collabware, we can deliver records management invisibly as seamlessly in the background. So a really good example of this overall approach might be a project site, for example. Somebody wants to start up a new project and you have standard document libraries within that project site: project initiation, project management, project close down, and so on and so forth. So a few other considerations before we move back onto the last topic of today. So the other considerations is, as you're going through an organization, if you do focus on this tiered approach to content, you might find that you're dealing with some of the content in somebody's realm, but not all of the content that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And you just need to think about, what do you do with that? It doesn't necessarily make sense to migrate all of everybody's content or all of one particular user's content all at once. I don't believe that that makes sense. But you need to think about how you communicate that and how you manage that from a change management strategy. As you go forwards here in thinking about these three tiers, you can develop a standardized project plan, or three standardized project plans, one for each tier. We think that there's real value in a really rigorous project management discipline. As you go through your enterprise content management program, there's less value in that bottom tier, the templated team side approach. But certainly as you get up into the business solution, these projects can be fairly complex, fairly time consuming, potentially quite expensive, and we think that you should really bring a certain level of project management rigor into these processes. And then finally, don't forget measurement. We've talked about measurement a few times. Don't forget to understand and articulate what success looks like, and start to think about how you might be able to measure and evaluate that success. And then as you start to measure and evaluate that success, you can communicate that to your stakeholders. Okay, that wraps up the tiered approach to content. I'm going to hand this over now to Natalie, and she's going to talk to us about some migration tools and techniques. Natalie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Rick. We're going to finish off our webinar session today by chatting about migration. Migrating content is the endpoint in your ECM project, but especially if you're a mature organization, it may be just the beginning of a long road of work ahead. You migrate content for many reasons. Maybe you're looking to retire old systems, or possibly reduce some risk in using third-party tools for collaborating on documents. Or you wish to streamline the experience of finding content for your employees and managing records for you. Whatever the reason, the migration process needs care and attention in order to ensure you simply do not move any content management issues you have in your existing system to the new system. Migration of content is always an underestimated effort in an ECM project. Oftentimes, the business sees automated migration as a way to fast-track the process, but there is still significant effort that the business needs to put into a migration effort, whether it's manual or automated. Before migration, you should analyze your content. Content should not all be treated equally, as Rick discussed previously in this webinar. You will have limited time and resources with any migration, and so you need to be thoughtful about how you approach the process. Simply finishing all of the content in one department and then moving on to the next is risky. Look to your file plan. A good first check is that content with longer retention requirements are more likely to be of high value to the business. Look to items such as legal, company governance, so your board of directors information, accounting records, employee health and safety records, environmental monitoring, and asset management. These are all places where your business is at risk if your documentation is not properly managed. Migration is never as simple as it sounds. Preparing and planning is key. Just like if you were moving to a new home, the effort you put into the prep for moving will most certainly be worth it in the time and energy savings during the actual moving process. You need to know where stuff from the old house maps to rooms in the new house. Those two homes may not have the same rooms. Maybe you're downsizing. Maybe you're combining content from a couple of people. Whatever the circumstance, you need a plan. This is exactly the same thought processes that you need to go through with your business stakeholders when working towards a migration strategy. Whether you're planning for a manual or an automated migration, it is best to do some housekeeping prior to moving forward, just like if you're going to move from one house to another. Most document control systems can provide reports, which can help you do the analysis. And if your organization is migrating from file shares, your IT department should be able to provide you with reports on the content across those network drives. Just make sure you work with your IT department far enough in advance to ensure that they have the resources available if they have to do some extra type of scripting or need to acquire a third-party tool that may need additional resources or budget in order for them to be able to help you out. When doing a cleanup, you need to look for the following items within your content. Number one, look for duplicates. Duplicates are relatively easy to spot. Usually they will have the same file name, size, and created and modified dates. We often see multiple members of the same team keeping identical copies of files for a project, or a number of people backing up for safekeeping. These duplicates can get significantly out of hand and will bloat your system. You don't want to move them over into your new ECM solution. Look for versions. Multiple versions of many documents may exist. They often exist as a result of review cycles. Determine if the documentation of that review cycle is critical before disposing of all of those revisions. You may need to keep multiple versions for proof of date of issue or reissue, or tracking who made what changes and when to a document. If you've used SharePoint, you know that it does not like certain special characters. For small batches, rename the files. For larger batches, work with your IT department to script the changes that are needed in order to ensure that the documents and files can make their way into SharePoint effortlessly. Oftentimes, content will be filed by or named using a date, month, quarter, or year. It's very common for you to open up a network drive and see a folder named for each month of the year, and then all of your reporting for each month put into that folder. I'm going to suggest that you consider moving that information out of those files with those names, and also out of the file names themselves, so if you've got meeting minutes with the date in them, and into metadata fields. Basically, that allows you more flexibility in sorting and filtering content as time goes on, which can help you out a lot when you're doing filtering on search results or other types of congregation of content across your system. It can be time consuming, but it is also something that your IT department can help you with. Files which have not been accessed or modified and are transitory in nature can usually be deleted. Others may need to be kept for a period of time in accordance with your file plan. Whatever the process is for this, it should be clearly articulated to your end users who will be doing the migration, or the team working on the automated migration process, as you do not want to accidentally delete files that are records in nature. Files and folders should never be attributed to an individual. We all create folders called Natalie's, or whatever your name is, project, and you need to work with your team to move that content into folders that are more meaningful. You need to be cognizant of the fact that these individuals, if they leave the organization, that content is essentially lost. It has no meaning to the remainder of the people within the organization and often will go stagnant. Finally, copyright material is something that we should be looking for within our migration process. Often in an ECM project, we will find large stores of copyright items, such as journal articles or work that people have brought with them from other companies. This leaves the business open to possible legal investigations, and this content should not be stored on business resources. Tell people to use personal storage. Once you have a good understanding of the scope of the content to be migrated and have cleaned up the content, you can then look to a script or third-party tool to help with migration. Successfully automating migration requires the following. First of all, you have to set up a proof of concept. You should test the way that you're mapping your metadata across a variety of buckets of content of different types and sizes and departments. You need to plan for a QA cycle, and that must be completed by subject matter experts in the business. Only they know whether or not the content has ended up in the right places that were designed for them. And finally, as a general rule, it's really only a good idea to migrate clear buckets of content using a tool. You should avoid trying to migrate unstructured data using some sort of automated migration tool. Really, the best target information and content for automated migration is large quantities of highly structured content. So this includes things like invoices and PO documents, where it can be very easily set up and that content moved over, and that process done manually would be extremely user intensive. Manual migration may seem less desirable than automated migration, but from a change perspective, manual migration can be very powerful. When teams manually migrate their content, they are engaging in authentic practice within the new system. They learn the ins and outs of the system, how it's built, how to effectively use the structure, and metadata associated with their content. As well, teams participate in the content migration and have an opportunity to make changes to the structure or metadata, which better fits the end user's needs. They can look for stuff with no home, look for homes with no stuff, look for things that don't have enough metadata, things that maybe have the wrong metadata. That authentic practice and feedback can really help improve the system. So we do encourage that even if some of the content is migrated automatically, that some of it is also done manually. To support that manual migration effort, we believe that migration is best done as a team. So host a migration party. The content is going to be used by the entire team anyway, so different perspectives on where content should go, what metadata is useful, and what views might be useful are important for the team to collaborate on. Bring the team together for a devoted period of time. Get started on the migration. Plan for a couple of other parties. We've found this to be a highly successful way to get adoption and buy-in to a new system. So, whether or not you use an automated or manual migration process, there is going to be content that does not get migrated, or that you simply do not have the resources to address. As we've mentioned above, we would suggest that you look at content from a business value perspective and start with that most valuable content and then work your way through to the least valuable content. So hopefully the stuff that you actually are looking at here shouldn't be your high value, high risk content, but you still need to address what to do with that. So what do you do with stuff that doesn't get migrated? Number one, it does have to be kept in accordance with your file plan. You simply can't just package it up and dispose of it. You still need to hold on to documentation according to that file plan that you've created. The one thing that you can do is you can restrict the ability to modify or access that content. So if it's on a network drive, you can lock down that read-write access to that content. What that means is that if at some point in time in the future somebody wants to access it or modify it and then start using it again, then it needs to be moved into your new system anyway. And so this avoids people working in the old system and the new and that content not being moved over. One thing that you can do is that you can bundle content with like retentions. If your users aren't actually using or accessing this content regularly, it doesn't matter so much how you actually categorize this content. So bundling it with like retentions makes it significantly easier over time for you to manage the disposition of it. And what you then need to do is visit that content on a yearly basis with the content owners and make decisions about what can be disposed of and deleted. By doing that, by bundling content up, it makes that final process significantly easier. Hope that we've given you some useful information to use if you're planning on migrating content at some point in time in your ECM implementation plan. I'm going to hand it back to Rick, and then we'll move into the question component of this webinar. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for that, Natalie. That was great. So we're going to wrap up right now. Thank you for listening to session 4. Bringing it to the business. We will hopefully see you in 2 weeks for final session 5, post-go live support and evolution. And that really will focus on things you need to think about after your initial deployment. And we believe that success from a post-go live perspective really starts quite early on in the process. And we know we have much more success supporting and evolving our clients' solutions when we start planning for that process actually very early on in the project lifecycle. With that, thank you very much, and we will speak to you soon.